welcome back for part two of answering the fans' questions. Now, I was just thinking it's a couple of days since we actually did the filming of part one, and we covered questions on recruitment, head coach, management team and infrastructure. Now, you've had a time to think about it, and everyone does this. After you've answered the questions, you think there's more to say. Have you thought of anything else?
Yeah, there's a few things, Cam, so thanks for starting off in that front. So probably a few things, and I was kind of speaking to Lee about this over the weekend. Probably the desire to come and actually speak was something that I'd heard Antonio Conte say that quite a bit before he eventually departed Tottenham. But the one thing he really criticised was the fact that every time football clubs tend to put the manager up front, the head coach up front, in front of the media to answer a million questions when things aren't going overly well on the pitch. And in his mind, nobody from the club really ever spoke about anything at that period of time. We just all took a bit of a step back. So this was a desire to do that, and I hope that in part one most of the questions were answered, because there was loads there, and I don't know whether there was any other way we could have done it other than pick the sort of very clear themes that came from it, and give as much detail as we could on all of them. But there is, and I've kind of kept my phone in front of me here just to remind me. So there was a question about the actual recruitment process. So I think I spoke about that quite a bit, but one of the bits I maybe didn't mention, because there was quite a few really direct questions about who actually signs the players. So I think I've spoken about the squad building process, how we try and make that work, how we get to the point of actually making decisions to sign players. And essentially at every club I've ever been at, the manager and the head coach will always make the final decision. And I think that's vitally important, because I think otherwise you end up in a situation where a head coach and a manager's got players that he doesn't necessarily want to work with and probably won't play. So I think that's a key question that came through. And again, if I think about who's been involved in the process this summer, so clearly George Stanger played at Hamilton and worked with Keith Glendinning while he was there. So Keith had a real hand in recommending George, because he knew that was a position we needed, felt he had the attributes that we were looking for, had a personal relationship with him because he'd worked with him before, and that undoubtedly helped that process of bringing him in. I went to watch George play live. Keith knows him and has worked with him. Dave Timmins also, and he's jolly watching a number of games here, there and everywhere, went to watch him too. So there was a number of people that watched him live, including Lee himself. So that was as always a team effort in terms of making representation and bringing information forward, but ultimately the head coach will always make the final decision. If I think about players like Jamie Murphy, again, Lee's got knowledge of him from his time in Sheffield, albeit the other side of the city. I knew him from working with him at Hibs, and we tried to sign him last summer. So when the agent came back this summer and said, look, Jamie's keen to think about coming, it became a wee bit of an easier conversation. So player that we needed, position that we needed, experience that we wanted, quality that we would like in that area of the pitch, and Lee's knowledge and my knowledge together made that a relatively quick transition. Aidan, Lee worked with him at Sheffield Wednesday. I didn't know him as such, but knew of him, and knew a lot of people that did know him. So, again, there was probably two sides of that conversation. Was Lee's knowledge of him as a player, having worked with him before, and then his desire to be involved in other wider aspects of the club that I was happy to sort of work with him on and chat with him on. And we'll touch on that, because I know that's one of the questions for later. So if I think about those three in particular, Robbie Much was one that Dave Timmins did, very proactive at trying to look at goalkeepers and make sure he knew in and out of all the young goalkeepers in Scotland that we might be able to attract to come in. Watched Robbie a number of times and was really keen, as soon as Aidan said he wasn't going to sign, that we actually try and move forward and secure his signature, which we did pretty quickly. So if I just take those guys and to give a flavour of all the different types of people that might be involved in these discussions, but ultimately that there isn't players signed at any club I'm at unless the manager okays them and wants them to be here, because I always think that's counterproductive if that's the case. So that was it on recruitment. There's another few things here. Playing budget was asked quite a few times. So again, it has been increased from last year. I think I did say that. So we took a percentage of the sale of Dippo to put back into the player budget, and we took the money that we got in from Dara to increase that as well. And that's all coming in as part of the overall running and funding of the business. So I think the other thing I would say is that as a board, we've taken a decision to have really ambitious targets, because ultimately that allows us to set bigger and more ambitious budgets. Now, some people might call that a gamble, others might call it a risk. And I think just to put it into context, we got pretty significantly more income than we envisaged from prize money last year from finishing second as opposed to where we budgeted to finish. But it looks now that the club will have made no money out of last season because we're spending as much as we're bringing in, and that's in a season where we did overachieve in the Scottish Cup and overachieve in the league in terms of what we budgeted for at the beginning of the year. So I'm more acutely aware, I think, now than I have been in previous roles of how challenging it is to operate a financial model at a football club. And essentially the board does need to make a choice as to whether it's very conservative in the budget that it works with, and then maybe tries to generate a little bit of income at the end of the year, or very ambitious to allow it to spend more money to try and compete. And we were 2 minutes away from probably losing quite a significant amount of money if we hadn't finished second in the league last season. So I think that just maybe puts that in the context a little bit, that we are ambitious in what we want to do, but we also understand that we've got a lot of work to do behind the scenes to try and generate the revenues that allows us to be even more punchy and even more ambitious and even more to spend even more money on players ultimately, which is the biggest cost that we would have. And if we can get that to increase, align with others at the top end of the league, then I think the expectation should follow that we should be up that top end of the league on a consistent basis. And at the moment, I think I've said it a number of times, we either need to be in a position where we outthink other people, outwork other people, or do things slightly differently to other people to try and get results on the park, because we aren't outspending people, and I don't think that will come as a surprise to anybody. So it's something I've kind of said pretty regularly. The infrastructure projects, though, aside from it, are funded externally, so the chairman is taking the cost of them personally, and that was one thing he picked up on in part one, was that I think I might have described him as a very wealthy man, which he's quite happy to admit he was before he bought the football club, and now he's not a very wealthy man. So a wealthy man, I think, would be a better title. But no, so that's him basically doing all of these things out of his own pocket. So that doesn't affect the budget of the club or the cost of the club. So and I've seen and been made aware of comments that building the hub stops us from investing in players. It doesn't. It was funded externally and actually helps because it's generating extra revenue that's staying within the business to help us do that. The stand will stop us from doing a number of things. It won't, because it's not funded from within the business, and again it will generate revenues through the kiosks and the hospitality spaces that will help us bring in more money into the club. So I think it was just important to clarify those things. And then I think lastly, I probably didn't mention in terms of the business side of things how important the player fund is. And I do think there's some questions in here today about season ticket numbers and supporters, etc. But the player fund have done a tremendous job in the last number of years since I've been here at increasing their membership and increasing the amount of money that they can give to the club on a more regular basis. And it's a huge help. And it's something we now budget for on an annual basis. So we think of the donations that can come in from avenues like that. So I didn't want to kind of start going off on another tangent, Cam, before I maybe just clarified some of these points, because I know there was particularly on who signs the players came up quite a bit, particularly on the budget. I thought it was good just to put a bit more context around that, and again I think it was good to give a bit more clarity around the difference between what the business funds and what's been funded by the chairman essentially and externally. So hopefully that just clarifies a few of the points from part one, and happy to kind of take some comments from part two.
Okay, so time to move on to some other questions that came in, and with 20 questions this time, there was questions about this specific season, and the outlying themes were: what is the target for the season? Are the club worried about relegation? How does our budget compare with other clubs? Has the Dipple money been reinvested in the squad? I think you've really answered that one already, but there might be more you can tell us about that. Can you give an injury update? Because we've had a couple of really bad injuries just now as well. And have more season tickets been sold this season? Quite a few questions there again.
No, that's fine. Please come back to me if I miss any of them. So first question was about this season. So I suppose the targets are related to the income and the finance. I think I maybe mentioned that just in my kind of clarification from part one. And they are punchy and they are ambitious. So I also think, though, we need to be realistic to a point in saying we are on a journey here, and I will reference, because one of the other questions talks about, you know, where we think we are on it. One of the big inspirations I've taken recently is Brighton, and their Chief Executive Paul Barber did a really good podcast recently about high performance podcast it's called. I'd really encourage all the supporters to actually listen to it, because there's so many parallels, I think, with what Paul spoke about the journey at Brighton being and what we're trying to achieve here at Ayr. Now, this isn't to put a timescale on where we want to be, but just to give a bit of context, Brighton and Brentford are probably two clubs I really look up to in England as being clubs that have gone on a journey for a long period of time, had real clarity about what they've tried to do, operated in a way that they think suits them, and actually then gone on to achieve success and punched well above their weight and well above their budgets and everything else. And both of them took 10 years to get there. Now, I'm going to caveat that by saying I'm not trying to do the usual one here and say we need 10 years, give us loads of time and all that sort of stuff. But I think it does highlight the fact that both Brighton and Brentford started in League One, and Southampton were another club that did similar and had a vision to be operating and competing in the Premier League in England. Some of the things that came out of that I thought were really interesting was that you need to be brave about having this type of vision, particularly if you're a club that hasn't operated at that level before. You need to be willing to talk about it, which I thought was interesting. And Paul comes up with a great quote, and something along the lines of, you know, if you start talking about it, people then start believing it. And if I'm really honest, that there's a bit here where I'm not sure whether, and this is a general comment, we believe yet we can be a Premier League club, because part of the journey will always be you'll get punched in the face. And that's part of every journey in sport. At some point you're going to come up with a time that's tough, and how you react and how you step up and how you move forward when times are tough defines where you're going to be and where you're going to go. And that for me is a real interesting part of the Brighton story, that they got to the latter stages of the playoffs, they got to the semi-finals, they got to the finals, they lost, and then they still went again and they went again, and now they're probably ahead of any other team that they competed against along the way in that journey, and they're getting, you know, huge plaudits and loads of rewards from their ability to transition players, transfer players, the level that they're operating at, the young players that are coming out of their academy. But this wasn't a year or 18 months in the making. This was a 10-year project where they're now seeing the real rewards of that, having had some really tough spells and difficult times to overcome along the way. I think there's a bit in there about where do we want to be. I think the first thing that we want to be is a club that can compete at the top end of this division consistently. Being promoted to the Premiership should absolutely be one of our ambitions. There's a 10% chance of doing it, and I think that's the other context. So there's only one team out of a 10-team league that can actually do that automatically, and then there's another team that's got a chance to potentially do it in a series of matches. So it's not easy, you know, and I do think that's really obvious, but it's also really relevant to recognise that we want to have this ambition and this desire to be there, but it's no easy, and it will take a period of time, and we will undoubtedly need a little bit of luck along the way, but we need to stick together and we need to actually keep that as part of our focus. So there's a clear target of where we want to be this year. I think the first thing that we want to be able to do is be a club that can compete at the top level of the league. And if I'd have sat here a year ago and said, where's our target? It would be, do you know what, let's try and not be in the last day of the season without trying to avoid relegation, because that's where the club had been in most seasons before that. So last year was undoubtedly punching well above our weight and exceeding the expectations I think we all had at the beginning of the season, which has probably set maybe a different mindset going into this season as to where we want to be. And I get that, and I love that, because that was one of the perceptions I maybe had when I came to the club, was that there wasn't a huge level of expectation and there wasn't a huge level of I'm not going to use the word ambition because that wouldn't be fair, but there wasn't maybe that level of expectation saying, oh, do you know what, Ayr United should be a team that's up the top end of the Championship competing for the Premier League. And I think we've managed to get there within a year, which is great, but it's also then brought some challenges with it, and maybe the expectations maybe a wee bit ahead of where we would see it ourselves in terms of knowing where the club is and the infrastructure that we need to build, the people infrastructure and the building infrastructure. So a bit of a long-winded answer there, Cam, but hopefully I've touched on a few things in there. There was 3 or 4 other questions as part of that first one, wasn't it?
Can I just push you a few seconds there? You say the top of the league. Are you talking top 4, top 6?
Yeah, that's no. I think for me, if you're in and around the playoff areas on a consistent basis, then clearly your chances of being promoted and being in those end of season games to get promoted are increased. So that I think is where we should always aim to be. And this league is harder than it was last year. There's no doubt about that. Next year, by all accounts, could be even harder again. But that's something that we need to embrace, and we need to keep looking for that staged improvement to be a team that can do that. Questioning it, are we worried about relegation? No, is the short answer. I don't think we can ever, in any team in this league, can ever feel that they are good enough not to be in the bottom 3 places, because the Scottish Championship is undoubtedly one of the most competitive and tightest leagues in Europe, if not the world. So 1 or 2 wins and you're suddenly facing a completely different picture. 1 or 2 losses and you're back down into a fight at the bottom end of the table. So I'm not going to sit here and say that we expect or demand that we are in any place in the league, because you need to earn your right to be in the places that we want to be. But 4 games into the season, am I sitting here worrying about relegation? Absolutely not. Because I believe in the people that are here, I believe in the squad that are here, I believe that a bit of time will see us generating far better results on the pitch, and I genuinely see this group being a group that can actually be at the top end of the league at the latter stage of the season. That's my honest belief. So.
A number of fans were talking about the budget position in terms of how do we compare to other clubs, because when we're hearing stories about people having specific clubs getting a lot of money thrown at them over this season and pre-season. So how do we compare to other clubs? So
I'll maybe just put a little bit of context on that. So every Premier League club at the beginning of the season, this information will be out in the public domain anyway, gets 660,000 from the league as a first distribution. Every club in the Championship gets 66,000. So that's the prize money that you get, the sort of distribution from the league. So that's a huge difference. The team that's relegated gets half of that. So again, even on day one, the team that's relegated from the Premier League is in a significantly better financial position than anybody else in the Championship, even although you assume that they would need to cut their cloth accordingly with some reduced budgets for being in this league rather than the Premier League. I think our budget will be probably a top half budget this year, but probably not by much. And I think that's the difference in when you operate in the Premier League. The difference between the budget of Celtic and Rangers dwarfs everybody else. The budget of Hibs, Hearts and Aberdeen is significantly more than the remainder, and then I would suggest there's probably the rest of the league is more or less on a par in terms of what they can spend. There might be a few $100,000 in it, which with those type of numbers maybe isn't overly significant. I think at this level the budgets are far more aligned, so I think having a top half budget and a bottom half budget might be 25,000 of a difference or 50,000 of a difference. It won't be 6 figures, but our ability to increase the budget this year has been based on trading players essentially, and has been again based on the board's willingness and determination to set ambitious financial targets for everybody in the business to try and support us being a team that can compete at the top end of the table.
And you mentioned earlier the percentage of Dipple's selling on fee was used.
Yeah, so I mean, again, I think there would have been a desire on the football side for all of it to come back in, and I totally get that. But I suppose this is the challenge of us looking at last year and saying there's a year where we did go around further than where we envisaged in the Scottish Cup, which brings with it additional prize money and TV money. We did finish beyond where we expected to and budgeted to in the league, which gives relatively significant increase in finance, and yet with all of that considered, the increased revenues from running the hub, we still didn't make a profit. So you take these things away on any given year, suddenly the club's budget and the club's finances looks entirely different. And I would say David Smith has been incredibly committed to the football club and willing to underwrite some losses and willing to really front up financially to help the club move forward on this journey. But I would suggest there's only a limited time any person can do that, and I think what we need to do is try and find ways for the club to become sustainable, operate within its means, and then punch above its weight from a budget perspective. So a percentage of the Dipple money going back into the player budget was absolutely the right thing to do. It has increased it from what it was last year, and let's hope we've spent that money wisely and we can see good performances on the pitch and winning results as well.
We've talked about season tickets before, and Lee's also talked about it, how important it is to help building a team at the beginning of the season. Lee's also counselled that we can't expect everyone to be able to afford them in this economic crisis times. But have you managed to sell more season tickets this year?
Yeah, so I suppose this is absolutely an area, Callum, that I need to sort of remove a wee bit of the emotion from it, because I suppose I can be quite impatient with things, as you well know, and I would love to think that with the journey the club's on, with the progress and the clear signs of progress that people in the local community are seeing, that we would have increased season ticket numbers from 1,200 to 1,600 in a year. You know, finishing second in the league last year, you know, seeing all these different infrastructure projects that are going on, hearing maybe a bit more from the club and seeing the kind of positivity, hopefully, that surrounds what we're trying to do. And it hasn't, you know, I think there was 1,250 season tickets that were bought in COVID, and I think that was pretty much a record, certainly in modern times, for number of season tickets that were sold. And that was at a time where people weren't doing anything, and there was maybe a bit more disposable income there. They were stuck in their house, and they were happy to help support the local team and help because they knew we needed it during those times of COVID. So I think actually increasing that 1,250 to 1,300 through last season was an increase, and that was probably something that in conversations with some staff internally they didn't envisage, because you know, time of living crisis happened post-COVID, and it was an increasing number, which is great. We've now broken through 1,300 this year, so we're sitting about 1,350 at the moment, which again is another slight increase. So I do need to probably temper my understanding of what's possible in this world. What I think is part of the bigger picture here is the million-dollar question: how can we actually generate more of a supporter base for this club? Because even looking back to the sort of the heydays when Bill Barr was here and the team was, you know, in cup finals and up towards the top end of this league 20 years ago, the crowds they weren't bigger than what they are at the moment. And I think everybody would assume you put a winning team on the pitch, you spend money, you bring in good players, you win games, people will come and watch. And that hasn't been the case here. And I guess there'll be a number of different reasons for that. But I think for us it's trying to figure out what type of things can we do and put in place that encourages people to come along to Somerset Park. The hub for me is definitely a part of that process, because people are coming here now not just to watch football, they're coming here for a whole different variety of events. Once the North Stand's in place, that'll increase even further with the type of things that we can do with that space. And again, hopefully you turn some of that business into people coming and watching. Things that we'd love to do, the rugby club and the cricket club do great ladies' days, for example, so maybe reaching out to a different demographic and bringing them here on a match day to have a different type of experience, and again, commercially be a great one, but hopefully we turn some of that into repeat business and they want to come back. So the season ticket numbers, I have touched on it a few times, and it is one of the biggest guaranteed revenue streams that the club can get. So clearly it's important for us to try and keep encouraging people to sign up. The savings that you can make over the course of a year are evident. You know, against coming and paying your money for every game, but also recognise it's not quite as easy as people to part with, you know, a few £100 in the summertime. The payment plan hopefully helped some people pay up over a period. We would love to do something like that again. I think I've maybe shared with you that was loads of learnings in that for us in terms of how we administer it, and that being left with one individual was really difficult for them to do alongside their full-time job. So we would love to try and find another way to do that going forward, where it maybe gives supporters a longer period of time to pay up their ticket, because it is the biggest guaranteed revenue stream that we can get. But I think a big part of my job is trying to figure out what other revenue streams can we tap into, how else can we encourage people to be part of the club, how else can we actually generate some income and some revenue here that we can then invest on the pitch, because that has been the chairman's vision since I first started speaking to him, and I genuinely believe that's the right way to develop the football club, and it is now a case of being as creative as we possibly can to try and generate as many new ways of bringing in money as we can.
A couple of questions about that fell in within that when I was having to read through them. I noticed a few people talking about how can we get the fans united again, how can we get the atmosphere up at Somerset Park, and also would part of this being improved performances on the park?
Yeah, I guess it is all related, Cam. Do you know, I suppose the comment I was saying is not to take away from it, because I think it's, you know, essentially that's why we're doing this in this type of format, because results over the last period of time have been disappointing. But it's the one thing in running a football club you can't guarantee. You can't guarantee the team winning on a Saturday. So you can guarantee that the hub will be open, you can guarantee that we can provide a good environment here for people to come and have a pizza and some drinks before the game. You know, there are loads of things that we can do around the match day environment that we can guarantee. Unfortunately, we can't guarantee the team's going to win because it's sport, you know, and that's just the way sport operates, that you can prepare magnificently well, all your support staff can do a great job during the week, your players can feel ready to go and face the opponent with as much information as we can give them in terms of what they should expect. But it's sport, and we've seen it a million times where the team that's not expected to win does, and particularly in this league and at this level. So I think, and how can we develop this environment at Somerset Park is absolutely on our radar. It's definitely something that we're thinking about and talking about quite a bit, Callum. The youth board will be a huge catalyst to that, so they've come up with some great ideas about how we can start to look at the atmosphere on match days. And look, you make a fair point. I think if the team's winning games and creating chances and scoring goals, the atmosphere by extension normally gets better. But it is the one thing in running a football club you can't guarantee. You can do all the preparation you want, you can give the players as much information as we can give them, all the support staff can be doing their job to the best of their ability, and unfortunately we still might not win on a Saturday because it's sport, and particularly in this league we've seen it every single season where there's unexpected results more or less every single week. So we can't guarantee winning football every week, and I don't think any club in the world can, but we do need to think about how can we make Somerset Park a really good place to come. So the hub, I think, is a part of that, where I've seen people coming with their families. It's a brilliant atmosphere in here before the game. You get some food, you get some drinks together, and we can go in and watch the game together as a family or groups of friends, and I love that. And I do think that's a bit for us to continue to think about how can we make coming to Somerset a great place to be. I think it's been interesting this year that now everybody's under cover, under a roof, so any singing that gets done really reverberates around the place, and that'll be the same next year when the North Stand's in place too. So I think all of these things should help. But we tried to do some things at the end of last year, some of the kind of pyrotechnic displays, the big flags that are coming in just now, different ways that we're trying to encourage people to come and make Somerset Park a really good atmosphere, and importantly a tough place for opposition to come and play.
You mentioned there the youth board, so that takes us on to our next section with 15 questions, future planning. Some of these you may feel you've covered already. The themes that came up there: where are we in our initial 5-year plan? Where do you think we'll be in 5 years? Is it the aim to be a Premiership side? Will we ever win a cup? What's happened to the Burnley Partnership? Any update on the youth board, which linked us with that last section, and any update on new directors? And one slightly different from those: how does the SLO help communication between the fans and the board? No problem. Can we maybe go through these one at a time? So the first one there was, where are we in our initial 5-year plan? I think in many ways we're beyond where we expected to be, and that's me being really candid. And I think it's important. Again, I keep talking about, and I am sounding inherently boring here, but talking about removing the emotion from it. So when I joined, the club was second bottom of the league at Christmas time. And the league had split into a top 5 and a bottom 5, and we were in a dogfight to try and stay in the division, which we did on the last day of the season with a win here against Partick Thistle. Fast forward 12 months, we're away to Inverness, and I think the 2 previous seasons before it was a last minute win at Inverness, or a point at Inverness, which kept the team in the league at that point as well. So to then go from there to scoring a goal to finish second in the league was massively beyond, I think, where anybody expected us to be. If we'd have been really honest at the start of last season, having the season that we had, would people have thought that was beyond the expectations? I don't think anybody would have said differently to that. So where are we? And again, because look, I'm going to be really candid here, Callum. Last season hurt. It hurt me because we spent a long period of time competing at the top end of the league, being first or second and being up there. We tailed off a wee bit in terms of other teams picking up more points over a period of time. And it hurt losing the playoffs the way we did. It really did. But I think over the summer I had a bit of time to reflect that I don't think we were ready to be promoted last year. And that's me being really honest. From an infrastructure perspective, from a people perspective, we're not ready. We're getting ready, and I think some of the additions that we've got just now are absolutely part of that. But that is me having to be really honest on that. We want to be a team that competes in the Premier League. We absolutely do.
Ayr United hasn't been there for 45 years, and I do think it's difficult to expect that transformation to take place in 18 months or even 2 years, or maybe even 5 years, because the club hasn't been there for such a long period of time. Winning a national trophy, I would love to do it. I was part of the staff at Hibs that won the Scottish Cup for the first time in 114 years, and it was probably one of the biggest highs I've ever had in my life. I want that feeling again. But part of it is us, all of us, believing we can do it. All of us believing we've got a part to play to make it happen. And all of us, you asked a question a minute ago about staying united, genuinely sticking together when times are tough. And this is part of my motivation to do here, because I'm, as a leader, not going to point fingers at anybody else and say you need to be doing this, this and this. I need to look at myself first here. So we've gone through a period of time we've not won games. Okay, we get it. It's disappointing, but we need to look at ourselves to say, what else can we be doing to make sure that these things turn? Part of it for me is standing up here and taking questions from supporters. But we need to stick together. We all need to be prepared to ride this roller coaster together, because it will be a roller coaster. And I don't think any of us have made any secret of that whatsoever. Probably over the last 18 months it's been more linear than I think what we expected. There's been more positives, I think, to speak about than negatives on the pitch, and this is the first time that we've really had a run of games where we've been disappointed and we've felt the results have been poor. The first time in 18 months, that's quite rare in football, but we'll come through it. I've absolutely no doubt we'll come through it. We'll win games again, and things will get better on the pitch, I've no doubt about it. But sticking together is really important as part of that. Being united is really important as part of that. And us believing that we can achieve what we set out to achieve is huge. And again, I'll talk about Paul Barber at Brighton. I think he said that that's when he started to feel things changing at their club, and people weren't scared to talk about these things. Maybe we are a wee bit at the minute, but why should we be? We want to be a Premier League team. We want to win a national trophy. And I have said it a number of times, there's clubs of a similar size, with a similar size supporter base, with a similar size number of season tickets, from similar sizes of towns who have done it. Why not us? Why not us?
Okay, changing direction slightly. There was a question there about the Burnley partnership. Now, it seems to have gone very quiet on that. What is the position?
It probably doesn't exist anymore, I wouldn't think. So I think when I saw it, I wasn't at the club at the time. I thought it was really, really clever, because I think what a lot of clubs tend to do is pick a huge club to be partnered with, because the name attracts some real interest. I think there was a lot to like about the concept behind it. So Burnley picking not necessarily teams at the top level and the divisions that they did, for me anyway, would have given them a really good place to send some talented young players who have, again, historically, players from that level tend to do quite well at this level, and the other teams that they picked at the different levels that they did as well. From a marketing perspective, it should have been great for them. For us, it should have given us access to learning from a club who are now back in the Premier League, but a club who spent a long period of time operating at that level. I think what you do need, though, is in these type of relationships, is people on both sides who are really committed to making it happen, and that just means regular dialogue, regular communication, semi-regular meetings with different staff at different levels, and we probably struggled to kind of get that level of input with it. So I think at this stage it's probably fair to say it doesn't exist anymore. What I would say, sorry Cam, I would be open to doing something like that again. I've done it in the past, and I do think there's real value in them, and I think if you can get that semi-regular level of communication, they can really work and they can be really beneficial. But at the moment, the relationship with Burnley, I don't think exists to the level that it was designed to in the first instance.
Thanks for that. That's really cleared a lot up. Any update on the youth board?
Youth board, yep, so we had one meeting before the summer, which was great. The young people attended the open day, they attended the game against Stranraer, and they actually attended the game against Alloa as well. So we were able to implement one of the ideas they had. So Jack, one of the young people, had suggested that we make mascot packages available, as a ballot for young season ticket holders and maybe those that couldn't afford. So Alloa game saw 11 young mascots take the pitch alongside the players, and that was his idea that we were able to implement pretty quickly. So we've set up now a schedule of meetings for the youth board for the remainder of the year, and we have said to them that we're more than sure there'll be more input from them. So I think what we got from the youth board is maybe not necessarily what we expected, But what we got was young people who are really get some brilliant ideas, really clear in the things that they want to work with. All of them come up with something entirely different, and I think what we want to do now as a youth board, or as the board of the club, is actually help them figure out how we can implement them. So rather than us suggesting to them, here's 2 or 3 ideas, can you think how we can do it? They've come with their own. They've been brilliant. Some of them are in match day experience. Some of them on maybe increasing girls and women's participation in football locally, which is great. A few of them spoke about actually having more participation, so school-based tournaments that we might be able to be part of as well, which we loved. One in particular about the match day experience and how we can actually make the environment in and around the Somerset on a match day better. And then Jack's was the mascot. So some brilliant ideas in there, loads of detail, and I think for us it's trying to support these young people to bring these ideas to fruition.
Okay, you mentioned the directors themselves. Any update on new directors?
Yeah, so we put an advert out a while ago for an advert, and I think it's maybe coming on to the next section anyway, for a director who could help in media. So I think what we're really conscious of, Callum, is yourself and your team do a huge amount of work for us, and with a lot of limitations in terms of sort of kit and equipment, time, etc. And I think we felt that it would be great to have somebody that maybe has that experience, probably runs a company that can bring us additional kit and equipment, maybe some additional expertise in some of the areas that we maybe don't have it, and maybe open up some links and some better networking. So we advertised it. There was a number of people applied. Those who had specific media experiences we've tapped into again, and we want to maybe bring them in as part of a wider sort of communication strategy to help us. We had somebody come towards us externally through that process, and I think we're probably still at the point of trying to figure out how and when they can provide help and support, because on paper the level of expertise they can bring us and the sort of equipment they've got access to and the partnerships that they could help link us in with are great, but it's maybe just taking a wee bit more time than we would have ideally liked to figure out exactly how that could work. So I know there was questions in there about highlights, and again, I do think it's important, Cam, to sort of at times admit things that maybe haven't been as good as you would have wanted. So last year, I think we're all aware that the sort of highlights output changed quite a bit, and a lot of that was sort of led by me trying to figure out how we can do it differently to the way we've done it in the past. So camera angles, I think, were looked at. Sometimes different people maybe doing edits, etc., just reduce the quality a bit. I would suggest though that, and even the regularity of it was more sporadic than I think we would have ideally liked. I would suggest though this year it's improved significantly. I think the quality of what we're putting out, the regularity of what we're putting out is significantly better. But we are always looking for ways to improve. And I do, if I'm thinking about the questions that were asked, some of them are very general about we need to improve social media. Well, I think if that's a comment in itself, we'll absolutely take that on board, but I would like a level of being specific on that, because I think the social media output from the club over the last period of time has improved significantly. So what is it, what aspect of social media is it that we would like to improve on? So one of the things that we've done now, Karen Malcolm has talked for a long time about generating a TikTok, done it herself, and being very honest, it's a world I know nothing about. It's a different generation that seem to interact using that medium, but she's now bringing together a lot of videos of players. The other day the boys coming in with their suits on, for example, just something that's just fun, and she's been able to do that. Maybe more training ground information that's going out on either Instagram or TikTok. And I think in an ideal world that's probably where we'd love to take our media output, that we do different types of content for different platforms. So LinkedIn generates a different market than TikTok, for example. X or Twitter maybe is a different demographic than Facebook, so maybe we need to find ways as we move forward to get different types of content on different platforms to interact with different groups of people. But certainly I'm happy in the direction of where this is going, but I do think it would be great for us to be able to work with different groups of people. I know you've mentioned trying to get a contact at UWS, which you've done, and again this individual we're speaking to has got good contacts in that space too, so it might well be that we can get good links with the local university, and as I know you guys have done in the past, and bring in some talented young people from that world as well, who can help to increase what we're doing. But I think having a wider communications plan is probably one of the next things on my radar to try and absolutely nail that, because this whole kind of setup is a little bit reactive to results on the pitch. I think in an ideal world, what I'd love is for us to have a real consistent message over the course of a season, and be able to, you know, say certain things at certain times, and keep the supporter base updated regularly using that basis. And I think a communications plan really helps with that.
Okay, there was one last question on that, was how does the SLO help communication between the fans and the board?
Yeah, so Jamie's involved in all our staff meetings. So we meet monthly as a staff group, and we talk about, you know, a number of different things that are relevant at the time. Every area's got an agenda item, so Jamie will feed in anything from the supporters at that meeting, and I dare say everything's there. It's very transparent in terms of the things that are going on at the club, and I'd like to think Jamie then has his own networks to feed that back to the wider supporter base. So, you know, I think the SLO role is now more prevalent across Scottish football, which I think is really good. And every SLO, I guess, needs to find their own ways of communicating back and forward. But no, Jamie's very proactive in the role that he does, attends the meetings really regularly, feeds back things into us from time to time, asks for support on certain things. And again, I would hope, well, does get the information that everybody else gets around those tables at staff meetings, and would feed that back to the supporter base in that way too.